Dr. Sacoby Wilson is founder and executive director of the Center for Engagement, Environmental Justice, and Health in Empowering Communities. And it's based at the University of Maryland at the moment. More on the center at ceejh.org. That's ceejh.org. He joins us now on Decision Makers as part of our Green Living Plan series. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the center. What type of work are you engaged in right now?
I have two teams, right? My C Jenk is my nonprofit, so it's separate from University of Maryland. At the University of Maryland, I have what we call the EJ Lab. So
Mhm.
that's the Health, Environmental, and Economic Justice Lab. And
Mhm.
so that group really focuses more on like doing sort of traditional research. One of the main things that we've done recently is really looking at mapping environmental justice issues in the state of Maryland, and so that's been a big part of the portfolio. Another thing that we've done is over the years has done a lot of air quality monitoring, and so we've done some work through an EPA funded project. To look at air quality issues in towns in Maryland like Cheverly, Curtis Bay, which is impacted by the Port of Baltimore and a lot of truck traffic, and also Turner Station. For those of you who know, Henrietta Lacks, the Gila cells, she's from Dundalk area, Turner Station area, and that's also where the ship crash in the harbor was a few years ago.
Right.
So we do air quality monitoring there. But a bulk of my work was shifted to my nonprofit, and I really want to establish a nonprofit so I can really do more, meaningful environmental justice work, more meaningful advocacy work, more meaningful organizing work. So through the nonprofit, we do a lot of what we call empowerment science. So the idea is, we don't, it's not with an EM, it's with an IN. So how do we use science to help people build their power, grow their own power? How do we uplift folks in communities that have been exposed to pollution every day? Again, like folks who live in Curtis Bay, folks who are dealing with chicken farms in the Eastern Shore, folks in DC who may be dealing with traffic, folks who are dealing with environmental hazards in wards, 7 and 8, or maybe they don't have good infrastructure, whether housing infrastructure, food infrastructure. We work with groups in Newark like SWIA, Soft Water Environmental Alliance. Oh, again, port-related issues, truck traffic-related issues, power plant issues. We're doing a lot of new work on the environmental justice front, on the air quality front, with folks with MCAP, Memphis Community Against Pollution, around the Colossus data center. So the Elon Musk data centers in Memphis. So a lot of the work is really, when we talk about empowerment science, working with impacted residents, community leaders, helping to train them to do their own science, helping them collect data. A lot of my work against around air quality, building these local air quality monitor networks so they can get their own data, they can tell their stories through that data, and they can use that, they can then translate that data to action.
Mhm. And how challenging is this kind of work right now in the current political environment? What do you think?
It's interesting. So when you think about like being on the ground with the people, right? I mean, folks are still fighting. People are persevering. People are optimistic because they want to see change. But because of sort of the pollution politics that are happening in the country right now, and particularly from the federal level, a lot of the current administration has done is really to undo what the Biden-Harris administration did as it relates to environmental justice, whether it be Justice 40 program, where a lot of the federal investments were going to communities that were disadvantaged, whether it be some of the equity efforts of the previous administration. Even you go prior to the previous administration, there were executive orders on environmental justice in the Clinton administration that they revoked, right? Executive Order 12898. There were things that have been done under the Biden administration that hadn't been done ever at the federal level, right? So you had Environmental Justice Department of Justice, right? That office is gone. You had environmental justice and State Department. You had environmental justice in agriculture. The Biden administration made sure that there was environmental justice offices in almost every federal office. We had something called WEJAC, the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, which at the at the federal level, right? When you think about CEQ, the Council of Environmental Quality, they really provide this overview, right? Provide all this input across the whole federal family. So all those EJ offices, across the federal family, all that EJ work to build regional offices and get more EJ personnel into the EPA 10 regions, right? All that was undone. Then you have the rollback of the National Environmental Policy Act. You're seeing rollbacks of the Clean Air Act. You're seeing rollbacks of fossil fuel standards. You're seeing fast tracking of data centers, right? You're seeing rollbacks of the endangerment fund when it comes to climate change, right? So basically, we don't have, in my opinion, a working EPA right now. There's nobody at the wheel at the federal level. So that means states have to pick up the slack.
Mhm.
State agencies have to pick up the slack. In some cases, we've seen some state agencies have picked up slack. We've seen some state attorney generals who have pushed back and fought back against the loss of funding and about the inaction or the dangerous actions that the federal government is taking when it comes to the environment, like Attorney General Anthony Brown in the state of Maryland was giving him a shout out for this great work he's been doing. But it's a tough situation. So you got the pollution politics. And on the other side, it's the funding. So in the Biden Harris administration, for the first time, you have billions of dollars available to address long-term environmental justice, climate justice, energy justice issues. And so for many people, that was a form of reparations, right? For the decades of communities been dumped on. The decades communities been used as sacrifice zones, right? The decades and decades of folks been poisoned by industry. And we don't have those dollars anymore. And at the same time, the foundations who were not given a lot of funding prior to the Biden Harris administration to environmental justice work or climate justice work, now many of them are shrinking violets, right? Many of them have kind of stepped back and not, we don't want to do environmental justice work anymore. We're not even doing climate change work anymore. We are doing climate change work. We're really only looking at greenhouse gas emissions and calculating reduction of greenhouse gases. Anything else is related to climate change that deal with people, that deals with health, that deals with justice and equity. We won't have things, not we, because I don't work at the foundation, but y'all get what I'm saying. They don't want to have anything to do with it. So the federal funding is gone, and the foundation funding that should have stepped up and stepped in to fill the void, that money's not there either. So it is a struggle for frontline and fence line communities when it comes to having the resources to address these issues that they've been trying to address. And it just shows you that the lack of I mean, no, well, they are being authentic. Like some of these folks who they said they were, down for the cause, that they were allies. These so-called allies, when the Trump administration came in, it was like turn the lights on, right? They disappeared. I'll leave it at that.
Hmm. You were talking about the states jumping in, fill the void, right? But the states themselves are going through a lot of belt tightening as far as their budgets are concerned.
Yeah.
So how do they deal with those or address those kinds of challenges? You seem to be caught in the middle right there between
Yeah.
wanting
It,
support, but their budgets being constrained.
yeah, no, that's a great question. It's really interesting, right? So, let's go through a thought exercise, right? So, to your point about there's a lot of the states, like state of Maryland, for example, we relied a lot on federal funding. Not just the funding, but the jobs, right? You think about the job
Right.
ecosystem for a lot of the residents of Prince George's County. Many folks, because they worked in the federal family, right? There's so many federal agencies in our county. So many federal agencies in the Beltway areas. We're so close to DC, right? Lots of folks have lost their jobs. That's one part, right? And so when it comes to social and economic safety nets, what that means
Mm.
for a state budget. And then you lose some of the federal funding that you naturally have gotten over the years, right? That also leads to tightening the belt. Okay, so that is a real issue, and they have to pursue new revenue streams. I would advocate and say that a data center investments is not a great revenue stream. I just want to put that out there. I'm kind of a data center. That's like my soapbox. That is not the panacea. That's not going to be the solution to our revenue issues in the state of Maryland. Even though there's a lot of folks in office who are running on data centers, who support data centers either explicitly or not explicitly, right? But I think that creates a conundrum for communities who they've been dumped on for decades, right? They've been extracted from, and also they've been used to host hazards. And then they have to use those social safety nets. They have to use those health safety nets. They have to use those economic safety nets. But now that we're dealing with this crisis at the federal level, which is impacting the overall state budget, oh, we don't have the dollars now to hire additional staff to do inspections. Oh, we don't have the dollars now to hire the staff to do the permit review. Oh, you're not gonna be able to really address those long-term issues, y'all, because we just don't have the resources. That's not fair. That's not fair to those communities who've been used to host these hazards. Whether it be industrial chicken farms in Eastern Shore, whether it be incinerators and power plants in Baltimore, whether it be power plants in Brandywine, whether it be building construction of highways and byways and the operation of highways and byways that bisect and dissect a lot of communities in Prince George's County and beyond, right? Look at Charles County, all the highway traffic in Charles County, right? Look at all the highway traffic in Metro Baltimore. We don't have the dollars to invest in, and I just said I used the term metro. We don't have enough dollars to invest in transit. You know,
Mhm.
that's a problem that is not the people's problem. That's not the problem of the people who've been suffering for decades. It's not fair to say because we have this budget crisis, we cannot address your issue. And again, that issue, when you put in the look at it in the vacuum, oh well, it's not a lot of cost associated with it. When you take it out of the vacuum and put it in a larger context, the folks who are suffering, they go to the emergency room more often. The folks who are suffering, they're unemployed more often. They're using more of their safety net. So it costs more to take care of them. So if you invest in those communities, if you bring better economic infrastructure instead of pollution intensive infrastructure, whether it be whether it be traditional kind of environmental facilities or uses or emerging like data centers, right? Invest better in those communities, create better opportunity, bring in industries that are not pollution intensive, you will have less need for folks to be on those social, health, and economic safety nets. And I think the lack of true cost accounting is what's been missing in decision making, even in this moment when they have to tighten their belts. So I'll pass the mic.
Yeah, real quick question. So if I'm a skeptic, another kind of policymaker that may not have a concern
Yeah,
about environmental justice issues, may not even have a concern about environmental issues on any scale, other than, okay, what are the industrial benefits? What are the
yeah,
economic benefits of me having a certain industry in my district or in my state? And I may say, well, where else are we going to put the incinerator? Where else are we going to put that chicken farm, like you just noticed, or
yeah,
particular industrial function? Like, where else can we put it? What other space can we put it if we can't put it here because
yeah.
of the harm to a certain population?
Well, I think that gets back. So that's one argument, like an old school environmental argument called the minority move-in hypothesis. I'll answer a couple ways. So,
Uh,
who was there first? I don't like.
uh,
I despise the term minority. I'm just using it for this purpose of this part of our conversation, right? Because you talk about power before. The term minority to me just language is important. It's a disempowering term for any group it's applied to. Okay, I just want to say that. Okay,
okay.
but just for this purpose, this conversation, let me not get. I'm very tangential. Let me get back to your question. So I would say that minority movement hypothesis. Who was that first? Was the industry that first? Or were the folks that first? Whether the low income groups, was the racialized minorities that first, right? And so that's been a really important discussion and debate about you think about industrial development, political ecology, all that kind of stuff, right? So you have that. Now, when you come to where do we put it? A lot of cases it's the avenue of least resistance. We put these things in places where people have less power, and lots of times your political power equates to your economic power, right? And a lot of it also connected to your race, right? Race is a social construct, right? But Dr. Bullard, who's known as the father of the Egypt movement, says some people had a complexion for protection. and some folks don't. Okay. So you have to bring race and racism into play when it comes to land use decision making, right? You think about City of Baltimore, for example. City of Baltimore was the first city in the country that had race-based zoning. It was thrown out by the courts, right? But what happened in the past really shows you sort of the social patterning of how why Baltimore looks the way it looks. Look at Lawrence Brown's book called Black Butterfly. The wings of the butterfly of Baltimore are hyper segregated economically and racially, right? In the body of the butterfly, you have more racial mixing and income mixing, okay? Class mixing. And the wings, what you see is more leg cases in the wings compared to the body. You see more asthma cases in the wings compared to the body. You see lower life expectancy in the wings compared to the body. You see lower home values in the wings compared to the body. You see more heat issues, right? In the wings compared to the body. Okay. So I answered the question that way as well, because when we think about the patterning of industrial uses, we end up dumping those facilities in certain communities and they become sacrifice zones, right? And you would say, well, I don't really care about that. Well, I would say if you don't care about that, then you don't care about the health of your own residents, because air pollution doesn't stop at the border. It doesn't stop. And this community may have more hazards, right? And they may be emitting particulate matter. They may be emitting volatile organic compounds. For the audience, I'm gonna say some scientific terms that y'all, I'm not gonna say them. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. What I'm basically saying, when you burn gas and you burn diesel, you get smoke. And in that smoke are a lot of pollutants that can cause cancer, cause heart disease, cause stroke, impact the development of your baby, as that baby as a fetus in the womb of your mother or your sister, right? It can impact your DNA. Okay, so that does not stop at the border of Curtis Bay. It continues on. It doesn't stop at the border of that neighborhood near the highway. It continues on, right? So even if you don't care about that industrial use, and because it's not in my neighborhood, it's like it's not in my backyard, that pollution is gonna move to your backyard. That pollution is gonna move to your schoolyard. That pollution will impact, folks going to your church or mosque, because air pollution does not stop at the border. So when we think about industrial, and let me just slow down a little bit, because I'm a fast talker from Mississippi. Let me slow down a little bit for the audience. When you think about industrial development, environmental justice at its heart is not anti-development. It is an economic justice movement. The idea is bring the best types of industrial uses to these communities because they deserve that, right? Because we use them to host externalities. So all that air pollution is not just going to the air, it's going to people's bodies, right? If people are drinking water that's contaminated due to industrial emissions, that's impacting their bodies. They deserve better. So bring the best types of industrial uses, bring the best type of job opportunities to those communities. And that's what environmental justice is about. It's not about stopping development. It's about stopping bad development.
Mhm. Hey, where are the worst environmental degradation impacts happening right now? Like, if you had to choose like the top three, top five zones, or top five regions, top five cities, places where these environmental impacts are happening, with the most devastating, destructive environmental impacts, like the most destructive case studies are happening now, what would they be
I would first go to the classic will be Cancer Alley,
in
that 40
Louisiana?
mile, yeah, 40-mile corridor between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. We have all that high concentration of petrochemical operations. So you think
Mhm.
about, classically, most EJ issues for the audience, environmental issues are energy justice issues. So you think about the whole life cycle of oil and gas, right? So when it comes to extraction, transport, processing, right? So when we're talking about Cancer Alley, we're talking about processing, and we're also talking about combustion. You go to the Houston Ship Channel, think about all those petrochemical operations, oil and gas in Houston. So I would say Cancer Alley. You look at Houston. You can go to cities in California like Richmond, California. I mean, it's hard to say which is worse because in many of our cities, it's the same stuff. You got a lot of coal-fired power plants, a lot of landfills in the same neighborhoods. You go to Wilmington, Delaware, and look at you found a black community that's low income. I think it's a landfill in Wilmington. Then we drive by the house like it's a huge landfill you can see, and it's right in somebody's neighborhood. So I can't really say what's worse. I can say based on some of the mapping that we do. So I have a mapping tool called Maryland Environmental Justice Screen. We actually use data, right, on environmental hazards environmental exposures, social demographics that provide a score at the track level, right? So you have this tool called Maryland EJ Screen. We do that for the state of Maryland. We have another tool called Mid-Atlantic EJ Screen. We do that for the whole Mid-Atlantic region. Well, not the whole Mid-Atlantic. It would be Maryland, DC, Virginia, West Virginia, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, right? And so with Maryland EJ Screen, I mentioned Curtis Bay a few times based on our scoring methodology. One of the assistant instructions, Curtis Bay has the highest score, the worst score for environmental justice in the state of Maryland. So that's one way to quantify is to use these mapping tools to quantify places that have high EJ scores. So that's a better way to do it and say, you can say qualitatively the eyeball test, while this city, it could be the worst, but there's so many cities around the country where you have black and brown folks, we have low income folks who are experiencing the same thing, being dumped on and living in the sacrifice zone.
Mm. Public conversations. So let's get into that, the public discourse on EJ issues, because sometimes how we talk about issues that matters. And sometimes more than the work, unfortunately, right? So it's like the term DEI, right?
Yeah.
Like woke, that term has been locked away into like sort of like a vault of forgotten public discourse. It's almost there. So I've had conversations with experts, policymakers, and others who've argued that the broader use of environmental justice, you may use it a lot, but it's less used these days. In some instances and
Yeah,
certain.
I'm gonna keep using it. I'm not scared of the current McCarthy. You know what I'm
Right,
saying?
right.
The McCarthyism. I'm gonna keep using it because people. I mean, it's interesting, right? It's really. So let me be
Yeah, go
be
ahead, go
honest.
ahead.
Let me be honest with the audience, right? So, my grant that I mentioned, right? It's EJ all day. But
Mhm.
when I do my report, it's actually so it's hard to continue to use those words because those environmental justice is on the list of illegal words, right? But
Mhm.
but I do have a grant that we're still doing environmental justice work. I mean, and partly because it's protected under the lawsuit. Because again, I gave a shout out to Attorney General Anthony Brown, and that's part of the reason that what I grant is protected right now. But it could be revoked, and maybe I said too much, right? Maybe it could be revoked. Maybe we should scrub that part of the interview. But but it's a serious discussion. So there are a lot of folks in the EJ space who we are. I mean, I'm not going to use this word in a bad way. We're fundamentalists. EJ is EJ is EJ. You know, what else are you going to call it? You're going to call it environmental equity? We've been there, done that. You gonna call it just the environment? No, the reason why we have an environmental justice movement because the environmental movement dropped the ball. It wasn't inclusive. It was not addressing the issues that folks were experiencing when it comes to the Warren County PCB landfill fight. All the folks that are experiencing petrochemical pollution in Cancer Alley. Those folks are suffering in Houston Ship Channel. Folks are suffering on west sides of many of our cities right across the country where that's where we dump everything. Or folks, I mean, forget my rural brothers and sisters, my indigenous brothers and sisters who are living with not having sewer and water infrastructure, like folks down in Mebane, North Carolina, folks in Nanjemoy, Maryland, who people are using porta potties for their waste, or people down in Uniontown, Alabama, when you flush your toilet, your waste goes to a sewage treatment plant. When they flushed their toilet, that waste was going to a containment pond. It was spraying the waste on the ground. Those are EJ issues, right? And so it's just, it's really interesting. Like, so you want to, what are you going to call that? You can call it environmental racism. We can call it environmental oppression. I actually say, I like this conversation, right? I don't think environmental injustice is strong enough. It's actually environmental slavery. That's what it is. So you look at folks that are hosting industrial hog farms in Eastern North Carolina. One of my mentors, Steve Wing, who passed away some years ago, he did a map that overlaid the enslaved population of North Carolina in 1860 with industrial hog farms. So guess what? There was a high correlation between where the enslaved population were at the time in 1860 and the distribution and concentration of industrial hog farms, where black folks were, like Duplin County, Hampton County, North Carolina. Okay. So to me, yes, let's change. We're going to use different terms. Let's talk about environmental oppression, right? Let's talk about colonialism. Okay. Let's talk about extractive capitalism. Let's talk about environmental slavery. Those terms are actually better terms. So I'll stop there. I'm being bad. I'll pass the mic. I'll stop there.
Uh, Difficult question here for some. I'd like to get your take on it.
Yeah.
All right. In environmental racism, it obviously impacts populations of color, Black, Hispanic, Native American, especially.
Yep,
We talk about communities of color. So evidence points to Black communities getting hit the hardest,
yep,
and on a really massive scale. So, but the way these issues are framed, uh, on a Black neighborhood scale, for example, they're typically viewed as a white people's problem. And
yep,
so
yep, yep.
because Black folks in the neighborhood, they're mostly concerned about day-to-day living, paycheck to paycheck.
Yes, sir.
So they don't see the destruction of their spaces being intersected with environmental issues. When they think about climate crisis, they're like, "Oh, I don't care about polar bears. I care about what's happening in my neighborhood." So
Yeah,
how do you like have that conversation with
yeah.
folks on the ground that, hey, this is a conversation like climate crisis? They may be persuaded by a little bit once the pollution starts hitting them as a public health threat, then some of them may come around. But for the most part, people are concerned about the violence happening in their communities, the
Yep,
economic income issues, finding a
yep,
job. How do you have that conversation for them? How do you persuade them? And one last question here.
yeah.
How do you get scientists, researchers to translate very complex scientific conversation or research that people can discuss, that people can understand right away when they hear it?
Great. Man, I'm not sure how much longer we got, but I can
Mhm.
uh,
Keep going, keep going,
pontificate and
keep going.
intellectualize
Yeah, yeah,
for,
keep
for,
going.
for a few minutes on this. So
I'm
so
going
if,
extensive. Yeah,
if I lose the question, so the first question,
right.
we want to talk about just how we talk about to regular everyday folks, right? And
They
so
get hit the hardest by this.
they hit the hardest. So that's a great question. So I mean, I'm gonna get to your point about. I made a point earlier about the environmental movement. The reason why the EJ movement, because the environmental movement was not been inclusive, not just these issues.
Right.
Also, the environmental movement, to your point, even on the climate change, have done a great job of selling at the environment about Coca-Cola and the polar bears. When I think about environment, it's still in my, even the first thing I think about my environment, still polar bears and the Coca-Cola pop in my head, right? For a lot of folks, like what are you? So that's really good sloganeering. That's really good marketing. But that's only a small slice of the environment.
Right.
And so what you've done is you've actually through that sloganeering, through that marketing, through that promotion, you've excluded millions of people from the environmental movement.
Mhm.
That's part of the reason why we have an EJ movement. But even you can take it to your point, bring it to the neighborhood, right? You got to make it every day. You got to make it proximal. You got to make it pocketbook. And I talk about when you engage in communities and talk about these issues, there's two hands of engagement. Hand one, I'm probably gonna mess it up because I don't have my slides in front of me. But what are the issues, right? What are the impacts from the issues? What are opportunities to address those issues? How can you engage on those issues? And how they can lead to partnerships, right? And
Right.
then any issue, environmental issue, any issue really, you can get connected to five things. One of these five things is gonna resonate with folks: food, faith, family, health, and jobs. So I call it the two hands of engagement. So if you're going to talk to folks, everyday folks who hit the hardest, when you're talking about environmental justice or climate change, you can't talk about environmental justice. You got to talk about the fact that they got to spend a whole bunch of their money on their energy bill because their energy bill's too high, right? In that data center, because they're on their grid, you're subsidizing that data center if they're on your grid, and you're paying more. Right? You paying more because of the data center. $10 to $15 more per month for some folks. That's 100, whatever it is, $150 plus per year, right? So when you're dealing with energy poverty, right, and you're dealing with this energy burden issue because of the cost of energy, it's an affordability issue, right? So talk about bring EJ to an affordability frame. The folks who have an energy shutoff issues. Why we shouldn't have folks going through energy shutoffs when it's not, in many cases, it's not their fault. You have an old grid. You have bad bets on different types of energy, right? We need
Mhm.
to make sure those folks have access to renewables. They deserve renewables. They deserve solar for all. They deserve community solar, right? They deserve the opportunity. And we think about just transition. Yes, I appreciate folks who are losing their coal mining jobs, right? But a just transition is also for folks who have never been able to get an energy job, right?
Mhm.
folks of color to get into the energy space to make sure they can get those jobs in those factories to build the solar, you know, panels, to build the wind turbines, that infrastructure is in those communities. So let's move away from dirty energy infrastructure. I'm getting off the question, but I'm coming back to it.
No,
Dirty
no.
energy infrastructure to clean energy infrastructure, bring those jobs and those factories, those facilities to those communities. But again, so you can talk about EJ from a jobs perspective. You can talk about environmental justice from a health perspective. 30% of the asthma cases that Black folks experience is due to air pollution. Okay, so some folks have from a racial perspective, have a pollution advantage, and some folks have a pollution disadvantage. Black folks have pollution disadvantage. So your kid's asthma attack maybe due to air pollution. Your mother's stroke maybe due to air pollution. Your elevated blood pressure, you got to go get your blood pressure medication. I'm on have blood pressure medication. My blood pressure is elevated right now. That's for this issue. It's because it may be because of air pollution, right? So connecting to health. Now you talk about climate change, right? I like to say, you may not believe in climate change, but climate change believes in you. If you're black, you brown, you indigenous, you live in a floodplain, you got underlying health condition, you don't have a lot of health insurance, right? It believes in you. And if you don't have air conditioning, if you don't have trees, you don't have access to cooling station, climate change believes in you right now. Because right now, folks experience extreme heat. It is hot as hell right now. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not sure how hot hell is, but y'all get my point. It's 115 degrees with heat index, I think, today. This is just the beginning. So, what does that mean for folks, right? Well, Dr. Wilson, he doesn't impact us all. It's hot for everybody. Yes, but some folks, it's impacting them more. Why? Because the history of segregation, because the history of redlining. Red line neighborhoods are 10 to 50 degrees warmer than non red line neighborhoods. Okay? A lot of our urban neighborhoods, we have poor folks, don't have trees, don't have urban tree canopy. That means they don't have the benefit of evapotranspiration, which basically means shading and cooling. And we've seen in a project called Baltimore Code Red, students from the University of Maryland College of Journalism did a community science report. And if you look at the maps on the website, in one neighborhood, on the same side of the street with a set of row houses. There was a 20-degree difference in temperature between a house that had a tree and the houses that didn't have a tree. On the same side of the street, con- adjoined to each other, right? So what we see is some communities, there's the haves and have-nots, right? And when it comes to some communities are heat ready and some communities are not. Some communities are climate ready and some communities are not. And a lot of that's rooted in segregation, is rooted in redlining, is rooted in economic inequality, is rooted in racism.
And yeah, real quick, before we go on to that next question, about, translation of complex scientific research language, but real quick, and then how do we perceive Black suburban areas, like say Prince George's County in Maryland, for
Yeah,
example,
yeah.
where it's like, still you have this collusion of, dominant Black anchor institutions, or the influence of, like the church. And this is everywhere. This is any Black community. It could
Yeah,
be
yeah, 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 no, definitely.
yeah, church, HBCUs, HBCU graduate, Divine Nine families, very powerful. So,
I
I
mean,
mean,
you can look at the back of my look what you see behind me.
right,
I'm an
right.
alpha. So
I saw that. Right, exactly. So,
okay,
how
so
do you get, like, I was watching the show one time, and it was a reality show. I'm not going to mention which one it
yeah,
was.
it's fine, it's
But
fine.
it was a Black reality show. And so the sister was buying a very expensive electric vehicle. And then she explains that, yeah, yeah, I care about the polar bears. And so it's like, like it's just trying to get. So
Bring it back,
how do you
bring it back down. Yeah, no,
how do you get these are powerful, influential Black people who also aren't thinking about climate crisis or environmental pollution issues. And are those same impacts happening in their communities too, even though they might be living in nice homes, even though they might have a little bit more tree canopy than their lower
yeah,
income brothers and sisters, say in Ward 7, Ward 8. Talk
yeah.
about that if you can.
Yeah, I would say so. So great question. And so, and I, you have to fact check me, and hopefully you can fact check me later. But
Yeah.
so we do. I've done a lot of work because I live in Prince George's County. I live in Bowie. So you think about, you think about, I live in unincorporated Bowie. So that it's not, so usually, for those who know what I talk about unincorporated, usually unincorporated means it's contamination right out representation. So you think about Brandywine, all the stuff, they're unincorporated. Um, Ninjamoy community that doesn't have sewer and water, they're unincorporated, right?
Right.
Lothian, that's dealing with a lot of impacts. They're unincorporated, so you see a lot of unincorporated communities. But we live just as a side point. But to your question, you know, Bowie, I mean, Prince George County is a wealthy, has a lot of suburban, middle upper class blacks, but we have a lot of poverty too. So you can go from like Bowie to Bladensburg, right? Or look
Right.
at Bowie in Adelphi, and look at other parts of the College Park area. Compared to other parts of the county, you see great difference in quality of life and infrastructure, and also in income, right? And so, but to your point, if you go to Brandywine, for example, there's been a lot of housing development in Brandywine. But I'm
Yeah.
not sure if folks really knew how close they were to the power plants when they built when they bought that house.
Right.
So you're seeing some of the same impacts in areas like Brandywine, regardless of your income, regardless of your class, right?
Mhm.
They may have, like you said, they may have a more tree canopy, but they're experiencing some of the same environmental impacts. And even if you think about folks, if you add the social stressors into it, right, psychosocial stress into it, even when you are upper class or middle class person of color, black person, you still may have some of the same adverse health effects because of the role of racism, right? So racism is still so yeah, you can't take that out. Can't take that out. So we're talking about chemical stresses, right? We're talking about air pollution. We're talking about physical stresses like heat and noise pollution, right? But you can't take out the psychosocial stress. So I just want to say that. But to your point about, as I like to talk about our infrastructure, right? So you got the Black Church, you got the Divine Nine, you got the NAACP. They're not all monolithic, of course. I would say that there's room for growth when it comes to leadership and advocacy around environmental justice issues. Some years ago, I was the national co-chair of the Alpha Goes Green Initiative for Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. It was a lot of work. It was very good work that we did. I would say that we had an MOU with the EPA due to our brother Dr. Mustafa Ali, who was with the EPA at the time, and getting an MOU. The AKAs, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, they also had an MOU. I think the first sorority to have an MOU with the EPA. So, but this was some years ago during the Obama administration. I'm not sure where we are as organizations in on the environmental justice front. I think we're doing some work that's more environmentally, and maybe it's more at the surface level, but that deep work that's needed to be done at the community level to address environmental justice. I know there's brothers who are doing stuff at the chapter level, but as a divine nine, I don't think environmental justice connected to health equity, the two things together, had been top priorities for our organization. So I say that. I would say when we get to the church, again, the church is not monolithic. Faith traditions are not monolithic. You have folks like IPL, DMV, Interfaith Power like DMV that brings together different faith groups doing a lot of good work on environmental justice. I was on a data center webinar with the historic Alfred Street Baptist Church like a month ago. They have a whole EJ ministry. I was working with a couple churches in Prince County on doing. Actually, let me slow down. Not a couple churches. I was working with several churches in Prince County, both AME churches, United Church of Christ churches, on doing air quality monitoring.
Mhm.
At churches. NWCP has been doing some great work. Aubrey Connor, some great work. She's the national, I think, the head of the EJ and climate change program on data centers. We have a data center counter report that we developed in response to the data center report that came out of the task force from Prince County, because that task report had nothing on air quality. Like, so they talked about all the pie in the sky. Oh, data centers are great. Nothing about air quality issues. Nothing about water quality issues. Nothing about energy issues, affordability. Nothing about civil rights issues. Nothing about zoning issues. Of course, why would they? You want to make it sound like it's great, right? And so we did the counter report. We did that in collaboration with NAACP. But I think that's opportunity for growth. One of my fraternity brothers,
Mhm.
he runs Green the Church. That's a national program that's looking at green issues, sustainability issues through the church, trying to use church as green hubs, right? So there's a lot of folks that are doing work in our sort of traditional infrastructure. But I think that again, there's opportunities for growth, there's opportunities for us to collaborate and do more. And you mentioned HBCUs. I mean, I graduated from Alabama A&M University. I wouldn't be here talking to you today without the mentorship of my faculty, like Dr. Rather Brown, who was another alpha, Dr. Marjorie Campbell, Dean, Dr. Ellis with the honors program, right? Dean Schufer for agriculture, okay? And, so this fall at Bowie State, which is 7 minutes from my house, we're going to be holding the 12th annual Siege Environmental Justice and Health Space Symposium. So the theme is EJ 2076, Make America Just Again. Well, we know it ain't been fully just, but y'all get what we're saying. And so, but our in-person days, which will be September 16th, no, 17th through 19th, will be at Bowie State. So that just shows you. So there are institutions like Bowie State, right? You got folks like Dr. Buller at Texas Southern. The father environmentalist at Texas Southern. You got other universities. You got folks at Meharry Medical College. We're working with them right now to expand our climate justice fellows program to create a certificate program. Meharry has the country's only global school of public health, and we're gonna be hosting with them a global EJ summit in August. So you do have pockets of folks doing stuff. I can't go through all the HBCUs and what they're doing. I got frat brother when we talk about alpha stuff. I'm gonna talk about alpha stuff too much. But Dr. Barnes doing EJ work at Morgan State University. We got Dr. David Paget at Tennessee State doing EJ work. We got again Dr. Lawrence Brown at Morgan State, doing EJ work. So there's a lot of folks doing EJ work. Got folks at Norfolk State doing flooding and EJ work in Norfolk State. So a lot of folks are doing EJ work at HBCUs. There are pockets of folks doing good stuff in the Divine Nine. I just think we need to make it more of a lead issue and more of a comprehensive, organized platform issue across all of Divine Nine. And then again, getting to the church, I think there's some churches individually doing a lot of stuff. There are state groups that are doing stuff as well. And I think this needs to be more collaboration across our faith traditions to uplift these communities. So I'll stop there. I know I've been talking a lot. I'll pass the
Yeah,
mic.
no, this is good. It's a fascinating conversation. So, I did ask you that earlier question about, taking complex
Oh, yes,
science.
sir. Yes, sir. Let's get back to that question. Yeah.
Yeah, and how do you translate that for, and this is not just in terms of EJ impact or E injustice,
Yeah.
E injustice impacted populations trying to understand it just for everybody.
It's everybody. No, it's interesting, man. I mean, I don't wanna riff too much and get myself in trouble because I'm very I like to be self-deprecating, but also I can be critical, maybe too critical. But I would say that, as I made the comment earlier about environmentalists that did a great job of selling the story that the environment is polar bears, and
Mhm.
we have so much work to catch up, right? Because of that. When it comes to climate change science, we've done a great job saying the world's going to end. Right? Who wants to hear that every day that the world is going to end? I mean, you think about climate anxiety, the climate grief that young folks are experiencing. Um, we've done a great job selling. I'm not saying that climate change isn't real. I believe it's real. And we think about the climate hazards that folks are dealing with, whether it be extreme heat that folks experience right now, 175 million Americans in the country experiencing. Um, you got extreme cold that folks are experiencing in the fall, right? In the wintertime. You got flood events, extreme precipitation that folks experience. We've got sea level rise that folks are experiencing in our coastal areas. So more tornadoes. So we're seeing more frequent, more intense hurricanes, right? We're seeing more frequent, more intense rain, precipitation events. We're seeing more intense flooding, prolonged flooding. So people say we always had it, but the thing is with climate change, it's worse. There's more events. It's more intense. There's a higher magnitude. Okay. And so, how do you confer that? How do you translate that? As a scientist, I'm gonna give two major points, but give some supporting statements, right? Um, One thing that's important, and I like to use little riffs to kind of explain stuff. You gotta translate it and it's about the messenger and about the message. So a lot of times with science, I think scientists, we kind of shirked our jobs of like translating research into like easy, understandable sort of information like what's the French term for those y'all watch Top Chef, amuse bouche, like little bites. That's the only French I know. So, so one of the things I also like to say, and it's like a Star Wars kind of riff, in the great words of Master Yoda, peer-reviewed publications does not science communication make. Yoda never said it. But part of the problem is for those y'all understand, like in the academia or research industrial complex, we get promoted on publishing in journals. How
Mhm.
many of you who are listening today have ever read a peer-reviewed article from a journal? Probably not that many people. So when it comes to science communication, we put a lot of value as scientists in publishing in journals because for our promotion, that's what's valued. But unfortunately, when it comes to actually having impact on policy in people's lives, it's going
Mhm.
to be a community report. It's going to be a policy brief. It's going to be a radio interview, right? It's going to be a newspaper interview. It's going to be a TV interview. It may be a podcast. It may be, it may be a PowerPoint presentation. We have to be able to use other forms of communication, uplift those to get to information that makes the most sense to the people who are most impacted and the people who can make the decision. So I think we have to do a better job when it comes to a fit for purpose. If you're trying to impact policy, a peer review publication is not, in my opinion, the way to impact policy. The best way to impact policy is for you to talk directly to the policymaker. Okay. You should be on a commission. You should be on an advisory council. You should be on a board where you're directly engaging policymakers. Now, in the state of Maryland, for example, I do a lot of work talking with staff and leadership from Maryland Department of Environment. Has it been effective? Hopefully it has been. We've engaged other agencies in the state of Maryland, Department of Housing, Department of Health, Natural Resources, around environmental justice issues. And like we created an environmental justice scorecard to grade the agencies on how they address environmental justice issues. I was on the governor's, I'm not sure how helpful this is either, but on Governor Westmore's transition team to help write the climate environment chapter in its transition plan, and I helped to write the environmental justice section. I think that there was some value there. Were all those promises made and things that we written down, were they done? No, they have not. But I think there's been some progress that's been made. A lot more progress that's expected, but some progress has been made. Okay. So that's one thing. Also, when it comes to translating science, I think we got to make sure the community folks are doing it themselves. So I
Yeah.
talked about empowerment before. So we do a lot we call community science. We train community members to collect their own data, but we also train folks to share that information. So the more that we can have the residents sharing their stories through data and doing peer-to-peer engagement and peer-to-peer sharing, and also being able to go to the zoning council meeting, go to the town council meeting, that's going to have more impact too. So again, making sure, so just to summarize, not focus on publishing in journals as the way to share the information, doing other social media, old school media, getting it in forms in the way that people like to receive it. It could be through their pastor. I said earlier, that's, people have an EJ ministry. Some churches have a health ministry. They be more trusted. So using trusted entities, trusted individuals to be the folks that share information, having ambassador programs, working with youth. Young folks are super smart. They know how to use the technology. The Gen Z folks know how to use social media. They're in class. Young people talking to each other, but also been to talk to their grandparents who may not be as technology savvy. So having those type of programs. So as folks are doing that type of work, you got this thing called promotors. One of our partners, Central Day Employee Familiar, they use something called promotors, health promoters. So basically, they're training local residents to share the information with other local residents, right? So again, having communities speak to each other, I think that's probably the best way. Because as I always say, you don't have to have a PhD to be a scientist. You just have to be able to use the scientific method. And I think the best way to do science communication is through everyday folks communicating with each other.
Yeah. And I mean, because I guess to that bigger point of, last kind of point here, and your take on it, disinformation, right? So
Yeah.
especially when it comes to topics like climate crisis or what causes climate crisis, like, obviously science is established that it is fossil fuels, it's the impact of that carbon dioxide in the air, but you got to deal with the disinformation, like, okay, natural gas, like that term, there's nothing natural about gas, right?
It's fossil. It's a euphemism. It's fossil gas, right?
Fossil gas, or
Yeah,
right, or that it's gas is fine, or that it's just part of the normal cycle that the
yeah,
planet goes through, right?
yeah. Oh, yeah.
That we're
So
moving, that the sun is
it's
moving closer.
biogenic. It's part of the normal cycle. Or it's biogenic emissions, right? So
Right.
it's always been. We always had this amount of CO2. We've always had this amount of methane.
Right,
Yeah, I
right.
got you.
Or that we're moving closer to the sun or vice versa. I mean, how do you combat that? I mean, I guess you combat that through better scientific information, or better ways of communicating
It,
sophisticated or really hard scientific research.
I think it's tough because if you if you say a lie enough, if you're very loud saying it, right, folks
Right,
gonna if you keep saying it, it must be true. Well, we know for the last, I mean, I'm gonna say a decade of certain people and certain movements, right, and the way they've been able to slogan their and market, they promote lies and they're consistent with their promotion of those lies, right? And so even if there may be a little bit of truth or a half truth or a sub truth or like a peripheral truth or an adjacent truth or 3 degrees of 5 degrees of separation truth, but they keep repeating it, it must be true. So we have to do a better job. As I like to say, on the defensive side, I'm a Steelers fan, so you got to have a defensive plan to deal with misinformation. You got to have really good information that you also present consistently, but your messengers have to be messengers that are trusted in those communities. So if you think about the environmental movement, why so much? So there's so much distrust. Let's talk about the whole issue of like trees, right? Let's talk about trees, man. Let's talk about planting food. I talk about my garden. I want to get another 30 minutes with you. I got a huge garden in my house. I was just amazed that I went outside today to do another podcast, and people had these arbors, right, and their grapes are growing. Like, oh my God, these grapes are so beautiful. My grapes have all kinds of fungus on them, right? I was just like really kind of jealous of what I saw today, right? So you think about, I mean, coming back to your question. So part of the problem is that, like even what I just said with that example, talking about food, it brings people together. You can get people to understand information about food, and then you connect food to agriculture, right? Large scale agriculture. You can connect food to sustainability, connect food to issues of greening. You can connect food to energy, right? And that's the way to not just deal with the disinformation, but you're breaking bread with folks. You're breaking it down in the ways that they're going to get and understand. So that's part of the defense. Right. So the steel curtain, so having a steel curtain mentality, the right message, the right messenger, being consistent, right? Folks that are trusted institutions, trusted individuals in the communities are the ones we have to focus on. And then offense. How can we have better offense when it comes to the misinformation and the disinformation? We got to change who's doing the science. We got to change how we communicate the science that we talked about. Academia will continue to fall behind and be part of the problem because academia continues to emphasize publish or perish, right? And not emphasizing translational science, not emphasizing dissemination science, not emphasizing action science. We have to transform how we do science. Part of the reason the advent, the growth of disinformation, disinformation, misinformation, and the anti-science movement, because scientists have dropped the ball. The institutions have dropped the ball. So we need different institutions doing the science. I like to focus on empowerment science, liberation science, action science, justice science, solution science. I have another term called taxpayer science. Let's do science that supports and benefits the taxpayers. So reframe how we do science, have different institutions doing the science, and have different folks communicating the science, and making sure we emphasize action and solutions when we're doing science. Yes, I appreciate you understanding, giving me more information about the magnitude of exposure and how it leads to oxidation and the stress, and then how it impacts my genes, right? Okay, but in the end, did you clean the water? Did you clean the air? Did you help people have access to better housing, access to better food? That's what folks want to hear. So we have to transform how we do science. We have to invest in better science. We have to invest in solution science. We got to support community science. Because again, you have to have a PhD to be a scientist. So there's a lot that needs to be done to push back on the defensive side and on the offensive side. So we can't have reformation. We need to have transformation to be able to be stronger in this moment in the future. So people can have more trust in science and then also have more people who look like them who are scientists. And again, not just credentialed scientists. Again, anybody can be a scientist. So we have to make sure science is for everybody. And once we do that, and it's more inclusive, I think over time, you're going to see a reduction in misinformation, disinformation. And also, you're speaking to folks in the ways that they get it. Again, through food, through faith, through family, through health, and through jobs. That's how you got to do it.
We've been talking with Dr. Sacoby Wilson. Thanks again, Professor. I really appreciate your time. That's it for this episode. I'm Charles Ellis, and I'm your executive producer and host. Warm round of gratitude to our partner, the Smart Services Coalition, as well as others like the Civic Literacy and Media Influence Institute. You can find this episode and more while subscribing at thebnote.com. Thanks for watching, and please stay safe out there.